A starving bobcat brought her cubs to a stranger's yard. What happened next left everyone in tears. The first time I saw her, I didn't know her name yet. She was just a scruffy, tan and gray-colored bobcat with pleading eyes and a coat that hung too loosely over her ribs. It was a sweltering summer day, and I was watering the small flower bed in front of my modest suburban home when she appeared at the edge of my yard. At first, I thought she was looking for water, so I set down a bowl. But she didn't approach. Instead, she whined softly, a low, rasping sound, and took a few steps back, her golden eyes never leaving mine. That's when I noticed the slight swell of her belly and the sag of her thin body. This wasn't just a stray bobcat. She was a mother. "Hey there, girl," I said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "Are you hungry? Where are your babies?" As if understanding my words, she turned and trotted a few steps away, then looked back at me. She repeated this action several times until I realized she wanted me to follow her. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself trailing after this mysterious wild visitor. She led me to a vacant lot 2 blocks over, overgrown with weeds and littered with discarded furniture and old tires. In a far corner beneath a rusted-out car, I could hear the faint mewing of cubs. The mother bobcat crawled under the car and moments later emerged with a tiny cub in her mouth. She gently placed it on the ground in front of me, then went back for another one. One by one, she brought out 3 squirming, squeaking bundles of fur. My heart melted at the sight. These cubs couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, and her eyes were just starting to open, and their movements were unsteady. The mother bobcat looked up at me, her expression a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Oh, sweetie," I murmured, fighting back tears. "You've been so brave, haven't you? Taking care of these little ones all on your own." I knew I couldn't leave them there. The lot was no place for a family of wild cats, exposed to the elements and countless dangers. But I also knew I couldn't just scoop them up and take them home. She was still a wild animal and might become defensive if I tried to handle her cubs. So I made a decision that would change my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I hurried home, filled a large bowl with water, and grabbed some leftover grilled chicken from the fridge. When I returned to the lot, the mother bobcat was curled protectively around her cubs, but her ears perked up at my approach. I set the water and food down a few feet away from her, then backed off. She watched me warily for a moment before her hunger won out. As she ate and drank, I sat on the ground nearby, talking to her in soothing tones. "You're such a good mama," I said softly, "taking such good care of your babies, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm going to help you, okay?" As the sun began to set, I knew I had to head home, but promised the little family I'd be back in the morning. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with plans. I knew nothing about caring for wild animals, let alone newborn cubs, but I was determined to learn. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would teach me about love, compassion, and the incredible bond between humans and wildlife. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to check on the bobcat family. I packed a bag with more food, water, and some old towels, then headed to the vacant lot. As I approached the rusted-out car, I could hear the cubs' tiny yips. The mother bobcat crawled out from under the car, her tail twitching hesitantly when she saw me. I took this as a good sign and slowly sat down on the ground, placing the food and water within her reach. "Good morning, sweet girl," I said softly. "I brought you some breakfast." As she ate, I studied her more closely. Despite her rough appearance, I could see she was a beautiful animal. Her coat, though matted and dirty, was a warm blend of tan and gray with dark rosettes. Her eyes were a piercing gold, holding a world of wild wisdom. "You need a name," I mused aloud. "I can't just keep calling you girl." As she lapped up the water eagerly, her ears flicked at the sound of my voice. "How about Cleo? Short for Cleopatra. You got that regal look about you." Over the next few days, I fell into a routine. I'd visit Cleo and her cubs 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening, bringing food, water, and gradually other supplies. I bought kitten formula and bottles, just in case Cleo wasn't producing enough. Milk for her little ones. I also brought blankets to make their den more comfortable and a large umbrella to provide shade from the scorching summer sun. Slowly but surely, Cleo began to trust me more. By the end of the first week, she would greet me with a flick of her tail and even allow me to sit closer to her and the cubs while she ate. The cubs, still too young to venture far from their mother, remained a pile of squirming, squeaking fluff beneath the car. It was on day 10 of our acquaintance that Cleo did something that brought tears to my eyes. As I sat nearby watching her eat, she suddenly picked up a piece of chicken in her mouth and brought it over to me, dropping it at my feet. She looked up at me expectantly, her tail flicking. "Oh, Cleo," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Are you sharing your food with me, you sweet, generous girl?" I pretended to eat the piece of chicken, then offered it back to her. She took it gently from my hand, her rough tongue brushing my fingers in what felt like a gesture of trust. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Cleo and her cubs. The vacant lot was no place for them to live long-term, but I lived in a small apartment with a strict no-pets policy. I knew I needed to find a more permanent solution, but for now, I was focused on keeping them safe and healthy. 2 weeks after I first met Cleo, I arrived at the lot to find her sitting outside the car, her tail twitching excitedly as I approached. The cubs had opened their eyes and were starting to venture out of their den. 3 pairs of bright, curious eyes peered up at me as I knelt down beside Cleo. The cubs were a mix of shades, each one uniquely beautiful. One had a golden coat like Cleo, another was a rich reddish-brown, and the runt of the litter was a pale, creamy tan. "Well, hello there, little ones," I said, my heart melting at the sight of their tiny tails flicking and their clumsy attempts to walk. "Welcome to the world." Cleo watched proudly as her cubs explored their surroundings, never straying too far from her watchful eye. I spent hours that day just sitting with them, letting the cubs crawl over my legs and bat my shoelaces with their tiny paws. As the cubs grew stronger and more active, I realized I needed to make their environment safer. The lot was full of potential hazards, broken glass, rusty metal, who knows what else. So I spent my weekend building a makeshift enclosure using old pallets and chicken wire I had scrounged up. Cleo seemed to understand what I was doing and even helped by carrying sticks in her mouth and dropping them near where I was working. By Sunday evening, I had created a decent-sized pen that would keep the cubs contained and safe while still giving them room to play and explore. The days that followed were filled with joy as I watched the cubs grow and develop their own personalities. The golden cub was the boldest, always the first to investigate any new toy or object I brought. The reddish-brown cub was playful and curious, constantly pouncing on his siblings. The runt, despite his small size, was feisty and determined, often wrestling with his larger siblings and holding his own. Cleo, too, began to change. No longer the skinny, weary stray I had first encountered, she was now a confident and attentive mother. Her coat began to shine with health, and she filled out nicely thanks to the regular meals. But more than that, there was a new light in her eyes, a spark of trust and happiness that warmed my heart every time I saw it. As the weeks passed, caring for Cleo and her cubs became the center of my world. I found myself rushing through work each day, eager to get back to the lot and spend time with my new wild family. My apartment began to fill with supplies, bags of food, toys, and a growing collection of wildlife care guides. The cubs were growing rapidly, their personalities becoming more distinct with each passing day. But as much joy as they brought me, I knew I couldn't keep them in the lot indefinitely. They needed a safer, more permanent environment where they could thrive. The thought of parting with them broke my heart, but I knew it was necessary. I started reaching out to local wildlife rehabilitation centers, hoping to find a place that could provide the cubs with the care and environment they needed. After weeks of searching, I finally found a sanctuary that specialized in rehabilitating and rewilding wild cats like Cleo and her cubs. The staff were experienced and compassionate, and they assured me the family would be well cared for. Saying goodbye to Cleo and her cubs was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. As the staff loaded them into the transport crate, Cleo looked back at me with those piercing golden eyes, and I whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. Be safe, Cleo. You and your babies deserve the best." In the months that followed, I stayed in touch with the sanctuary, receiving updates on Cleo and her cubs. The cubs thrived under the sanctuary's care, growing strong and confident. Cleo, too, adapted well, and I was told she'd become a role model for other rescues. Knowing they were safe and thriving filled me with a deep sense of peace. Looking back, I realized that meeting Cleo and her cubs changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. They taught me about resilience, trust, and the power of compassion. That one small act of kindness, feeding a starving bobcat, set off a chain of events that transformed my life. And though Cleo and her cubs are no longer with me, they will forever hold a place in my heart, a reminder of the extraordinary bond that can exist between humans and the wild creatures we share this world with.